Hello my friends, it's Laura and it is time to wrap up the month of April. April was the most successful month I've had so far as reading. Not only did I read the most amount of books this month that I have all year, but I found 3 favorites of the year. 3 books that I'm obsessed over. A new author that I'm obsessed with, or I should say even more obsessed with than I have been before, and a new series that I'm obsessed with. So it was an incredibly good reading month. Most of the books that I read this month were 4 or 5 stars. I read a total of 16 books, which is like 5,800 and something pages. Let's get into it. I did vlog throughout the month, not the entire month, for most of the month of April. So if you want to hear any more in-depth thoughts about any of these books, do check out my vlogs for the month. But let's just get right on into it. I think I'm gonna go in the order I read everything so I don't forget anything. But the first book I finished in April was The Fires of Heaven by Robert Jordan. Of course, I had started this beast of a book in the month of March and I just finished it up in April. I ended up really enjoying this one. I gave it 4 stars. This is the 5th book in the Wheel of Time series, which is this epic high fantasy series that I've really been loving. Do these really need to be so large? I don't think so. Like, we could tell the same story in a more concise way. And the things that kind of irritated me in this particular installment is, first of all, Perrin is like not in it at all. Perrin is one of my favorite characters. Also, there was so much cattiness between the women in this book, particularly between Nynaeve and literally any other woman that she's around. Like, there's constant cattiness and bickering and fighting, and I'm like, why are we doing this? Like, I understand that this was written by a man quite some time ago, but the cattiness in this just got to me. Like, it was like too much. Other than that, Robert Jordan knows how to end a book. The ending of this was epic. It was spectacular. I really enjoyed my time with the ending and I'm looking forward to continuing into the 6th book. But I did give it 4 stars. There's really not much else I can say about it because it's the 5th book in a series. I then read When I Was Your Age, Life Lessons, Funny Stories, and Questionable Parenting Advice from a Professional Clown by Kenan Thompson. This was so much fun. I gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed listening to this. I listened to the audiobook. Kenan narrates the audiobook himself. And I just loved, it was very nostalgic for me because he talks about his early years as a child actor. He talks about Nickelodeon, all that, Good Burger, all the way up till SNL, and his relationship with Kel, and it was just funny. It was interesting. I liked seeing the people he met along the way and kind of the people who shaped him into who he is. I was giggling. I was having a good time. I gave it 5 stars. I highly recommend, especially if, like me, you were of that generation. If you grew up watching all that, the nostalgia was very strong. So I had a great time with it and I gave it 5 stars. Next, I read probably my favorite. It's hard to say because, like I said, I read 3 books this month that were just absolutely incredible and I don't know how to rank them, but one of them was The Haunting of Alejandra by V. Castro. Fell in love with this. How personal it was to me as a mom, as a woman, as someone who is very spiritual, as a witch. It did everything that I needed it to. It was relatable. Basically in this we are following Alejandra, who is a young mother of 3 kids, and she is struggling. She's struggling. She's dealing with severe depression and also a very absent husband, and trying to make it through the day with her 3 kids, honestly. And if like fighting her depression isn't bad enough, she is now being haunted by some supernatural entity, let's say. And because of all this, she decides to go to a therapist. She goes to a therapist and starts diving into her history, like her family history. So we also have kind of like this generational story as well, where we get points of view from women, ancestors in her family. We see the similar things that she went through, that they went through. So this is very much a generational story. It is very much a story about depression and postpartum depression and motherhood and generational trauma. And it's just done so well. Like the spiritual aspect of it, the motherhood aspect of it, the incredibly strong characters that feel real and relatable. This was just, it meant so much to me. It meant so much to me. I was highlighting and underlining like every single line in this book. Everything I've ever thought or felt was written down in here, and it was beautiful. I cried a lot. That's a theme when it comes to my favorite books. They all make me cry, and it was absolutely 5 stars. I loved this. If I didn't mention, this is a horror, and this is the kind of horror that I love. I love female-led haunting stories about the horrors of womanhood and motherhood and generational trauma. It works for me every time. Highly recommend it. The next book I read was The Last Heir to Blackwood Library by Hester Fox. I was pleasantly surprised by this. I didn't know what to expect from this. This was the first time reading from this author, but I ended up really enjoying my time with this. So this is a historical fantasy. It is technically fantasy. It feels more like magical realism, but I guess it's fantasy. We're following Ivy, who is a 23-year-old woman trying to make it in the world after losing her brother in World War I. She's alone, she's on her own, and then she gets a letter from a lawyer telling her that she is now the new inheritor of Blackwood Abbey. So she's just inherited a title, a home, and everything that goes along with that. So she goes to live at the Abbey, she becomes Lady Hayworth, but as soon as she gets there, she starts noticing that all of the servants are acting really suspicious and standoffish or downright rude. She is somewhat of a scholar and a lover of books and stories, and so when she finds out that there's a library on the property, she gets very excited, but the servants don't want to let her into the library and start acting really weird and suspicious about it. But she is determined to figure out the mysteries of this library, of the Abbey, as strange things start happening, especially as she spends more time in the library, and things grow more and more sinister. And the story just kind of goes from there. And it's really good. I had a very interesting experience reading this because I started out really not understanding the main character, Ivy's motivation, not her motivations, but just like why she seemed so nonchalant about certain things that were happening. But it all made sense in the end. Once you figure out what's going on, then everything kind of falls into place. It was a little mind-bendy, a little twisty, and slightly confusing, not in like a bad way. I like what it did. It went in a direction I did not expect it to go in, and I really enjoyed that. The only real issue that I had with this, the tone seemed strange to me, because at first this feels like, especially when she first gets to the manor and she starts hearing noises and things start moving, like it feels like this very creepy haunted house type story, and it's very atmospheric and gothic, but then it starts to feel cozy towards the middle of it, and then it just gets really twisty. So is this trying to be gothic? Is it trying to be cozy? I don't know. It kind of felt both ways at times, so I couldn't get a clear picture of the tone of it. But other than that, I really enjoyed my time with this. There's a little romance that happens in here, although I really don't think it was done very well. But yeah, I will definitely read more from Hester Fox in the future, because I think she has a very strong sense of atmosphere in her writing, even though the atmosphere kind of became all over the place at certain times. I really did enjoy my time with it. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I highly recommend. The next book I read was Role Playing by Kathy Yardley. This is a romance featuring 2 older characters, which is something I really liked and want to find more of. But in this one, we are following Maggie, who I think she's like 48, 49. We're also following Aiden, who's 50 or 51. But both of them are really into gaming. They're really into online gaming, and that's how they meet. They meet via a online gaming guild, and they become really close friends. But she thinks that he is some young 20-year-old, and he thinks that she's like in her 80s. And so when they finally meet in person, they're both shocked to realize that they're around the same age. They develop this beautiful friendship before becoming lovers, before the romance hits. That is what I absolutely loved about this. I don't tend to love friends to lovers as a trope, like when there's a pre-established relationship of friendship, but when it's done like this, I love it. When 2 people meet and they become friends and then the romance comes after, I love that so much. It was slow burn. It just works so well, and because these characters are mature and know what they want out of life, they're both very good at communicating those things. And not only that, but there's no third act breakup or third act conflict in here at all. She is very much this grumpy, don't give a fuck kind of woman, and he is a cinnamon roll golden retriever of a man. He is so sweet, and I just loved them together. I loved their dynamic so much. He is someone who kind of lets his family especially and his friends just walk all over him. He doesn't know how to create boundaries and say no to people, and she, like I said, does not give a fuck. Aiden is bi, also demisexual, which he is just figuring out, and I really liked that aspect too, because it just goes to show that no matter how old you are, there's still so much to discover about yourself even, and about the world. And so he's figuring all that out. He's bi, and they are at a wedding where someone like outs Aiden. Maggie gets so pissed on his behalf that she's like arguing and standing up for him, like, you don't do that to someone. And then the person is still not getting it and still being rude as fuck. And so she takes off her earrings and she's like, hold these, climbs across the freaking table, tries to fight this, like, she is, I loved her so much. Oh my god, I loved her so much. This was fun, it was funny, it was sweet, and I really felt the chemistry between these two people. I felt their romance. I had a great time with this. It wasn't a full 5 stars. I gave it 4 stars, maybe like a 4.25 if I'm being really specific. Then I read The Good, the Bad, and the Aunties by Jessie Cusitanto. I ended up giving this 3 stars. This is the 3rd book in the Aunties series, the first book being Dial A for Aunties, which I loved, and it worked so well. I feel like since the first book though, the 2nd book and now the 3rd book just haven't felt the same. I feel like situations, the plots are kind of getting old because they're a bit recycled at this point. It was funny still in parts, but I just feel like we're losing the plot as the series goes on. I'm not sure if I'm going to want to continue reading after this 3rd one. It wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't the best, so I gave it 3 stars. The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, which is another one of my favorite books of the year. I read it the day it came out, almost all in one day. I could not put it down because it was so incredibly compelling. But this takes place in Spain during the Spanish Golden Age. We're following our main character, Lucia, who has the ability to perform magic. She is a scullion. Her mistress, Valentina, is not very like high in social status, and so once she discovers that her maid has the ability to perform magic, she starts like parading Lucia around, hosting these dinner parties and showing her off so that she can kind of raise her social status. But because of that, Lucia gets noticed by the king's former secretary, who is very eager to get back in the good graces of the king. And so he holds this competition to find the next king's champion amongst these young people who have the ability to perform magic. And our main character, Lucia, gets wrapped up in all of that. And along with that, the person who trains her is Santangel, who is a very unusual, immortal man. And the story kind of goes from there. It has a bit of romance, it has a bit of mystery, it has such incredibly interesting themes and characters. The characters in here just feel so real. It has a lot to say about colonialism and religion and how religion is used in colonialism, and it's just such a good story. The way everything came together in the end was just absolutely beautiful. I think the romance between Lucia and Santangel was stunning. I also liked what it had to say about power and power corrupting. No matter how much power you get, it's never enough because you're always going to want more. And I feel like that is done very well in here. I think the women, the way she wrote the women in here, I loved seeing their story arcs throughout the entire book, because even if they weren't main characters, you still saw them grow and develop to the end of the book, and I just loved that so much. So this was incredible. I keep thinking about it. It was so atmospheric. The writing is lush and beautiful. I feel like every time Leigh Bardugo writes a new book, her writing just improves exponentially, and it's that was definitely the case in The Familiar. Her writing is so beautiful, and it's the kind of story that is very haunting in that the story and the characters will stay in your mind for quite some time. I think that if you liked The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, if you liked Last Tale of the Flower Bride, that you'd really enjoy this as well, not because it's a similar story, but it gives you a similar feeling to those books. So this was absolutely 5 stars. I loved it so much. Then I went down this T. Kingfisher rabbit hole that lasted until the end of the month. The very last day of the month, April 30th, I finished like 2 more T. Kingfisher books. I'm obsessed with this author. I've always really loved T. Kingfisher since I started reading her years ago, but like, I'm now reading everything. the time has come. So I started off reading the first 3 books in the Saint of Steel series. So I read Paladins Grace, which is the first book. This is a fantasy romance series where we follow the paladins of the Saint of Steel. These paladins, unfortunately, their god dies, and now they are left with this gaping hole that the god left behind. They are broken, battered men mentally because they have lost the presence of their god. So in this first one, we're following Stephen, and all of the paladins are now working for the Temple of the Rat because they needed to find somewhere to serve. Stephen is escorting someone somewhere when this woman literally runs into him because she is being chased, and she's like, hide me. So they have, and I'm not gonna tell you what happens after that, but it's the funniest thing ever. They have the most ridiculous meet cute ever. The 2 of them end up having to work together because there's some murders going on in the city, and the 2 of them get mixed up in it. And the story goes from there, and they fall in love, and it's absolutely beautiful. I love Stephen so much. So he is a berserker. All of the paladins of this order are berserkers. When their god was alive, their god was able to bring them back down, like stop them. But now that their god is dead, there's nothing holding them back. And so Stephen especially believes that he is absolutely too dangerous to ever be in a relationship. And Grace has a lot of things from her past that she's dealing with. She finds it very hard to trust people, and the 2 of them they're both pretty like awkward individuals, and so the 2 of them together was just hilarious. The situations they found themselves in was hilarious. They're both extremely attracted to each other but trying to stay away from each other because of their various issues, but of course they can't. And it just, everything about this was so perfect. Not just the romance itself, but the actual plot of the story and the things that are going on in the story are very interesting. This series is absolutely amazing. Paladins Grace is the first one. Gave it 5 stars. Absolutely loved it. I love Stephen and Grace. Out of all the books I've read so far, Stephen and Grace are still my favorite couple, but I've loved every single one of the books. So I gave that one 5 stars, and then the second one is Paladins Strength, which follows another one of the paladins, Istvan, and a woman named Clara. They end up in gladiatorial pits at one point. I didn't love Clara and Istvan as much as Stephen and Grace, but I still had a really good time with this, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. And then the third book in the series is Paladins Hope, and this one is between Galen, who is another one of the paladins, and Piper, who is a doctor who examines dead bodies, and the 2 of them are literally the cutest couple ever. I still didn't love them as much as Stephen and Grace, but I really did love their dynamic. The first half of this book I didn't love as much as the second half of this book, simply because of where they were and how the plot was going. But this ended up being 5 stars by the end. It made me cry. There's something about the themes in here, and like the theme of otherness, of PTSD, of mental illness, of trauma, and the way it's woven into the story so well. Like, T. Kingfisher is an absolute master at everything that she does, honestly. But I had the most amazing time with this series. There's another book in the series, the 4th book, which I haven't read yet, but I will probably read in May because I need it in my life. Very much recommend this series, especially if you love T. Kingfisher and you haven't read this series yet. Please do. It is so freaking good. The romances are incredible. The plot is fun and interesting. And I had an amazing time reading this entire series. Let me just talk about the other T. Kingfisher books I read this month, because while we're on the subject, I read A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by T. Kingfisher, which is more of a younger YA, I would say. But in this one, we're following Mona, and Mona is a baker. She's 14 years old, and she's a wizard, but she believes not a very good one, because the only magic that she has, the only way her magic works, is through baking, through bread. She can make gingerbread men who walk and dance. She has a sourdough starter named Bob, who is her familiar, which is just adorable. But this story gets started when Mona opens up the bakery early one morning only to find a dead body. And so once she informs her aunt and uncle who run the bakery, they call for the constables, and then she ends up getting accused of the murder. So then she has to clear her name, but then also she discovers a plot against the Duchess, and ends up having to save the entire kingdom. So as a not very good wizard, it's so cute. It really is. And I really, again, loved the themes in here, once again, of prejudice and othering, but also the fact that as a 14-year-old girl, she had so much put on her shoulders. And I think it talked very well and in a very nuanced way about the fact that children should not be put in that position. Children should not have to save the world. Children should be able to trust and rely on the grown-ups who are supposed to take care of them. This talks about the fact that a lot of the grown-ups absolutely let her down and did not take care of situations when they should have. And so she had to step in. And I really liked the way that was talked about, and I think it was done really well. I gave this 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. It wasn't a full 5-star. I definitely want to reread it, and I want to have a physical copy of it. I listened to the audiobook for this one. But yeah, it once again has like the incredible T. Kingfisher humor. It was so funny. I was giggling, but I was also tearing up at moments. Like, it's so good. And then the very last T. Kingfisher book I read was Bryony and Roses, which is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. It's a short novella. It's only like 200 and something pages. And I just love the way she retold the Beauty and the Beast story in here. We're following Bryony, who is a gardener. She ends up getting lost in a snowstorm in the forest, and comes across this enchanted manor and runs into the Beast. And you know, the story goes from there. I'm not going to say a lot about it, but I love the characters that T. Kingfisher creates, because I feel like they're just so relatable. Like, you can imagine yourself in these situations reacting the same way. I loved Bryony, I loved the Beast, I loved the magic in here and the overall atmosphere. It was really good. And again, I gave it like a 4.5 stars. Okay, that was all the T. Kingfisher I read. Then I read my first manga ever, and that was Cat Plus Gamer Volume 1. I read this at a time where I was feeling a bit slumpy in the month, and I just needed to read in a different format. I needed to try something new, so I tried manga. And after the learning curve of reading the other way, I got the hang of it, and I ended up enjoying the experience. I think I enjoyed the experience of reading it and the art more than I did the actual story. It's very simple. It's about a girl who finds a stray cat at work. She is a gamer, and it's just her taking care of the cat, and they're super cute. I gave it 3 stars. I don't have a lot to say about it. It was fine. And then I reread Uprooted by Naomi Novik, and if you saw my vlog reading this, you'll know that this didn't go as well as I wanted it to, and it's not because it's a bad book. It's just because I completely misremembered the plot of this. I don't know if I mixed this up with another book or what exactly happened, but I didn't expect what it was, because in my memory it lived in my head as a completely different, not a completely different story, just being told very differently. But we are following Agnieszka, who is a young girl who lives in a little village, and every 10 years the dragon, who is this very powerful wizard, comes and takes one of the girls to live in his tower. No one knows why or what they do, but eventually they do come back. And so Agnieszka has a best friend who everyone has always believed since they were young girls that her friend is going to be taken because she's the most beautiful girl in the village. But when it comes time for the dragon to pick someone, he picks Agnieszka instead. And the story kind of goes from there. There is a sentient, haunted forest situation in here. There's very beautiful, interesting magic. There's a little bit of a romance. And that's the thing. I kind of inflated the romance in my head over all these years. And so when I read it, or when I reread it, I realized that the romance is such a small part of this. But other than that, I really liked rereading this. I really liked the overall atmosphere in here. I think Naomi Novik is amazing at creating atmosphere. I love a good dark sentient wood, so that was very exciting. And overall, I just really loved being back in this world. I was just so confused and surprised that I had misremembered so much of it, but I ended up sticking with my original rating of 4 stars. I will definitely reread it in the future again and hopefully have an even better experience now that I know it's not what I remember. Okay, and then I read the third of my favorite books of the month, and that is The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk. This book hurt me, it destroyed me, it made me cry, it made me laugh. This was everything. This is a Regency era fantasy romance in which we're following our main character, Beatrice, who really does not want to get married and wants to become a very powerful magician. However, in this world, women are not allowed to use magic or to become magicians until they have had all of their children, until they're older in years and have had all of their children, basically. Partially it's because of the way magic works in here. If you have magic and you get pregnant, you are susceptible to being possessed by a spirit, and kind of controlling a spirit is how you control magic in this world. And it's also partially because it's a freaking patriarchal society and women have no rights. So our main character Beatrice does not want to get married, but unfortunately her family is like in dire straits. Her father has made very terrible business decisions, and now they're kind of on the brink of losing everything. He's kind of mortgaged everything and is banking everything on Beatrice getting a good match. So Beatrice kind of has to marry in order to save her family, but she doesn't want to. She wants to become a magician. She's kind of torn between all of these things. Meanwhile, she has been dabbling in magic and has been looking into, there's kind of like this secret underground women magician movement. So she's trying to get in on that, and then she meets Iante, who is our love interest, who is completely wonderful and understanding, and they have a beautiful little romance, but she can't give up her freedom to use magic to marry him either, just because she loves him. So she ends up having to choose between love and magic and power, and the story is so beautiful. I mentioned this in my vlog that it is very theme heavy, which I know a lot of people don't like, but for me it worked really, really well. I loved seeing the conversations that we had in here. It's really a story about gendered expectations and bodily autonomy. It's just done so well while all still being a incredibly beautiful, heartfelt story. I think that the author, I loved how the author in her acknowledgements like described this. She says it's Pokemon but make it Jane Austen, and that's kind of what it is because of the magic system in here. Like I said, you have to bind spirits to you, and the spirits just have this childlike, innocent personalities that are so much fun. So it's almost like these little companions that they have, and it is like Pokemon when you think about it. But then you have this Regency romance as well. It's just, it did everything perfectly. I had a great time with it. I bawled my eyes out and I laughed hysterically. 5 stars, one of my favorites of the year. Oh my goodness. Okay, so the very last book that we have to talk about is The House Witch by Delamock, which I'm not going to talk about much because we just did our live show for this, and I will link the live show down below in the description if you want to check out our full thoughts. But The House Witch is a cozy fantasy following a man named Finn who becomes the royal cook and tries to hide the fact that he is a witch. It has a little bit of romance. It was good overall. Like, it was a good story. It was the longest story I have ever read, and not because it's an exceptionally long book, but just because it kind of meanders and does what it wants. It doesn't follow like traditional plot beats in a story. It just is what it is, and if you go into it knowing that, it's a good time. So I ended up giving it 4 stars. I'm definitely interested in continuing on with the series, but yeah, this was our Black Hat Book Coven pick for April. So like I said, I'll leave the live show linked in the description if you want to check out all of our thoughts. But that is it, my friends. Those are all 16 books I read in the month of April. April was an amazing month. I'm very excited for the month of May to see what I end up reading. If I have a similarly good time, we shall see. Talk to me down in the comments. Let me know your thoughts and opinions. Have you read any of these? Did you enjoy them? Are you looking forward to any of them? Let me know everything in the comments. If you want to leave me an emoji to let me know you were here, leave me a watch or clock emoji in the comments. But that's going to be it for me today. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!